Shaman's Evolve mechanic has always been one of the most unique mechanics in all of Hearthstone. It embraces the digital medium of the game to do something that you can't really do in a normal TCG. But that being said, over the years, whenever the Evolve mechanic returns to Standard, it almost inevitably goes on to become oppressive and breaks the game for a bit until the devs step in. So I thought today it would be worth going over why Evolve has become a problem, and can anything be done to fix it? But before we do that, real fast, if you enjoy these types of discussion videos, make sure to hit that like button and also subscribe to the channel because it really does help get my videos out into the mystical YouTube algorithm. Now with that out of the way, to better understand what I think are the current issues with the Evolve mechanic, we first need to take a step back and go over how Evolve has evolved over the course of Hearthstone's history. And I swear this is the only time I make that joke. But anyways, this takes us to the Whispers of the Old Gods expansion, where at the time, Shaman was kind of in a weird spot. While the class was coming off of some recent success with aggro overload Shaman during the League of Explorers meta, up until that point, Shaman had generally been one of the worst classes in the game, mostly due to its main class mechanics of overload and totems being kind of bad relative to what the other classes had at their disposal. And so with Whispers of the Old Gods, it seems that the devs wanted to push the power level of Shaman's main mechanics while also trying to find new design space for the class, which resulted in the classic Evolve cards. Now, for their time, these cards weren't really that good, but they were a huge hit with players who found them to be super fun to play with. And the devs recognized this, and over the next couple of years, Evolve Shaman got more support with additional Evolve effects as well as more synergistic minions. But despite all of this support, Evolve Shaman always remained more of a fun archetype during its original run in Standard. That granted would occasionally become more viable at times and see some serious play, but it was generally outclassed by more competitive decks. And this idea of Evolve being more of a fun rather than competitive archetype is truly what defines this early era of Evolve in Hearthstone and what made the mechanic so endearing to players. And this also masked some of the inherent issues with the mechanic that would become clear in the future, because years later there would be one event that would completely recontextualize how players viewed the Evolve mechanic while also ushering possibly the worst era in Hearthstone's history. And that would be the infamous Doom in the Tomb event. So for those who don't know, Doom in the Tomb was a mid-expansion event that sought to shake up the Standard meta for the first time by reintroducing noteworthy cards from Wild back into Standard. And while the devs brought back some classic heavy hitters that define past metagames, what the event is most remembered for is the reintroduction of the card Evolve back into Standard that created the most oppressively powerful Evolve Shaman deck possibly ever. But more on that later. But anyways, what made this Evolve Shaman deck such a monster relative to past iterations of the archetype was not so much Evolve, but rather the cards around it. Because you see, the iconic combo with the more fun Evolve Shamans of the past was Evolve with a Doppelgangster on turn 6 to summon 3 random 6-drops. This combo applied pressure, but it was late enough in the game where it was answerable in a number of different ways. But with Saviors of Old Doom, we got the 3-drop Desert Hare, which allowed this new Evolve Shaman to pop off a whole 2 turns earlier and create 3 4-drops on turn 4 by comboing Desert Hare with Evolve. Now this was challenging enough to deal with, but what really pushed this deck over the top was the ability to cheat out Mogu Fleshshaper, which cost 7 mana at the time, which means that you could evolve it into an 8-drop. So this Evolve Shaman could potentially cheat out 3 4-drops and 2 8-drops on turn 4. And hey, if you wanted even bigger minions, you could also play a Mutate on one of them as well, because that costs 0 mana. But anyways, the big problem with this Evolve Shaman deck was basically that it could cheat out way too many stats too early in the game, to the point where there was very little counterplay because removal and AoE was not good enough to keep up with this overwhelming power so early in the game. In addition to this, since evolving also gives you random minions, this exacerbated counterplay issues because, hey, you can't play around minions you don't know about, and there can be huge differences in minions of certain costs. Now, the ability to cheat stats and the randomness are inherent to the Evolve mechanic, but players didn't mind it as much during Evolve's original run in Standard because the Evolve combos were much slower and less powerful, as opposed to Doom in the Tomb Evolve Shaman, where the Evolve combos were super fast and through Mogu Fleshshaper really emphasized the playstyle of cheating out expensive minions early in the game that you could then evolve to cheat even more stats onto the board. And despite players overwhelmingly hating this kind of playstyle with Evolve Shaman, and everyone universally agreeing that this was horrible for Hearthstone at the time, this playstyle of cheating out minions and evolving them immediately to cheat out even more stats would go on to define future designs of Evolve Shaman. In the following year, we'd receive the card Bogspine Knuckles. That was really good because when you played it, you could also cheat out 1 to 2 Dreadcoursiers in the same turn and evolve both of those for a big old tempo swing. And while the explosiveness of this deck was nowhere near the Doom in the Tomb levels, eventually it did become problematic enough where the devs needed to nerf Bogspine Knuckles to slow the deck down. And now this brings us to the current iteration of Evolve Shaman, where things have gotten so ridiculous that the deck feels less like a dedicated Evolve deck now and more of a deck that just wants to high roll early in the game with Goldshire Null. And even though this Null Evolve Evolve Shaman can't go as wide in the early game as its Doom and the Tomb counterparts, this focus on high rolling an Evolve combo before your opponent can react to it basically makes these two Evolve Shaman decks the same. But in a way, this new Null Evolve Shaman could even be considered more powerful, which I'm sure will be very controversial in the comments, but hey, hear me out here. One of the most frustrating elements of Evolve, that being the randomness, is also an inherent balancing factor of the mechanic, because there's always a risk that sometimes you'll low roll the Evolve and get a bad minion. Shout out to my boy Doomsayer. But in Standard at the moment, the 10-drop minion pool in particular is arguably the best it's ever been, and if you evolve a Goldshire Null, you have about a 50% chance of evolving into a good minion, depending on your definition of the word good. But regardless, you're pretty much always coming out ahead as long as you don't evolve Goldshire Null into another Goldshire Null. But I guess even that could sometimes be good too, but now we're getting kind of away from ourselves here. Because while Evolve has consistently been critiqued for introducing too much randomness into games, the current iteration of Evolve Shaman simultaneously has too much consistency with evolving Goldshire Null, because even the low rolls are still pretty good. And the new Blazing Transmutation from Return to Naxxramas has made this consistency issue even worse, because now you're able to have more control over the outcome of your Evolve because you can discover a minion. And as of the recording of this video, Evolve Shaman is sitting at the tippy top of the meta as the best deck in the game. So given all of this, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Null Evolve Shaman is more powerful than the Doom and the Tomb Evolve Shaman. But at the same time, it's kind of like comparing pineapple on pizza to raisins and cookies. Like, sure, you can compare them, but at the end of the day, they're both bad. Now, food slandering aside, now that we've gone over the abridged history of Evolve, I think we can circle back to why Evolve has become a problem. Because on the surface, it may seem like power creep that has gone too far, but I think there's something deeper going on design-wise that is the real culprit here, and that would be that Blizzard took Evolve, which was originally more of a fun mechanic, and pushed it to actually be good. Now, this could be a whole nother video if you know what I'm saying, wink wink, but I will say for now that the strength of the original Evolve mechanic is that it created silly, ridiculous moments in Hearthstone that both players could kind of enjoy, even if things didn't go their way. But as players have experienced firsthand, when Evolve is pushed to actually be competitively viable, it tarnishes what made the mechanic fun in the first place. Because now these ridiculous and silly moments are deciding games so early that instead of feeling joy, you're now just feeling powerless and cheated when on the receiving end of the stuff. So I think the way to fix Evolve would be to stop pushing it as a competitive mechanic and start pulling it back towards its more fun roots. Shaman design space has opened up immensely since the introduction of Evolve, so I think the class will still be totally fine if the devs decide to start powering down future Evolve cards, and I think this will also just make Shaman just a more fun class to play and also just play against, because Evolve has really just consistently just become a very unfun mechanic in the game, which is sad because it used to be something that actually brought players a lot of joy. But with all that being said, what do you think about the Evolve mechanic? Let's continue this discussion down in the comments below. And if you like these kinds of Hearthstone discussion videos, make sure to check out my recent retrospective on Mercenaries and why it became Hearthstone's biggest failure. But before you do that, make sure to hit that like button and also subscribe to the channel. And of course, in the meantime, stay superior, and I'll catch y'all next one. Later. Get that